The case of SCP-343 was an anomaly, even for the Foundation. Not for its power, mind you. We've contained, or at least attempted to contain, entities and objects capable of unraveling the fabric of reality with a casual flick of whatever appendages they might possess. No, SCP-343 was an anomaly, because it was, by all accounts, the most cooperative, dare I say, docile anomaly we'd ever encountered. It claimed to be God, the creator of the universe, and unlike most anomalies, it was more than happy to discuss its supposed creation with anyone who asked. That was the real paradox, a being that claimed omnipotence, willingly confined. I'd spent 20 years in the Foundation, seen things that would curdle the blood of lesser men, things that would shatter the sanity of even the most hardened academics. Yet here I was, Charles Ashton, senior researcher, renowned debunker of the unexplained, preparing to interview an entity that purported to be the author of existence. They called me the Debunker, a title I wore with a certain grim pride. My career was built on a foundation of rigorous skepticism, a steadfast refusal to accept the supernatural at face value. I'd exposed fraudulent psychics, explained away miraculous occurrences with cold, hard science, and even managed to contain a self-proclaimed demon that turned out to be a creature from a parallel dimension with a penchant for theatricality and an allergy to tungsten. Huxley, my mentor, had drilled into me from the beginning that the scientific method was the only weapon against the darkness. "There's always a rational explanation, Charles," he'd say, his voice a low, steady drumbeat in my memory. "You just have to find it." My new assignment, however, threatened to challenge everything I thought I knew. SCP-343. The file was a fascinating, if frustrating, read. It described a being of extraordinary power, capable of manipulating matter and energy at will. Yet this power was seemingly tempered by an unwavering benevolence, a genuine desire to help and cooperate with the Foundation. It was a paradox that gnawed at my logical mind. Why would an omnipotent being willingly subject itself to containment? Why engage in polite conversation with researchers, answering their questions with a patience that bordered on saintly? It didn't add up. The Foundation, of course, had its theories. Some believed SCP-343 was a powerful reality bender, albeit one with a remarkably stable personality. Others whispered of a hidden agenda, a long game we couldn't yet fathom. My personal favorite was the hypothesis that the entity was simply lonely, a cosmic castaway seeking connection in the only way it knew how. My eyes drifted to the digital file again, specifically to the addendum detailing SCP-343's appearance. An elderly man, race indeterminate, harmless, even grandfatherly according to the reports. Yet the photographs sent a shiver down my spine. There was a subtle wrongness to the entity's features, a sense that they were simultaneously familiar and alien, like a face glimpsed in a dream, half remembered but deeply unsettling. The eyes, though, those were what truly disturbed me. They seemed to hold an ancient wisdom, a depth of knowledge that dwarfed the combined understanding of all humanity. I found myself drawn to them, repelled and fascinated in equal measure. It was like staring into the abyss, and finding the abyss staring back, not with malice, but with a gentle, almost pitying amusement. Site-19 was always quiet, a reflection of the sheer amount of energy and effort that went into keeping the contained anomalies from making their presence known. The Foundation was a world unto itself, a network of corridors, laboratories, and containment cells, all dedicated to a single, overarching purpose: to protect humanity from the things that lurked in the shadows, the things that defied explanation, the things that went bump in the night, and sometimes the things that claimed to have created the night itself. We were a necessary evil, a bulwark against the encroaching darkness, or so we told ourselves. But the longer I spent within these walls, the more I questioned the true nature of our mission. Were we truly protecting humanity? Or were we simply delaying the inevitable, staving off a cosmic reckoning we couldn't possibly comprehend? And what of the cost? The ethical compromises, the moral grey areas we navigated daily, the secrets we buried even deeper than the anomalies we contained. These thoughts, once a mere whisper at the edge of my consciousness, had become a persistent, nagging drone. My attention shifted to a worn, leather-bound notebook lying on my desk, its pages filled with my meticulous handwriting. It was a relic from my early days at the Foundation, a tangible record of my unwavering belief in the power of observation and documentation. Inside were detailed notes on dozens of cases, each one a chronicle of my ability to find the rational explanation, to dispel the illusion of the supernatural with the hard light of reason. Each solved case, each debunked anomaly, felt less like a victory and more like a missed opportunity. Had I been so blinded by my skepticism that I had failed to see the bigger picture? Had my rigid adherence to the scientific method prevented me from recognizing a truth that lay just beyond the reach of my empirical tools? Huxley's words echoed in my mind, but now they sounded like a mantra repeated so often it had lost all meaning. A chime from my terminal signaled the arrival of a new message. It was a reminder from Dr. Clark, the head of research for SCP-343, informing me that the interview room was prepared. It was time. I closed the notebook and rose from the chair, my joints protesting with a chorus of pops and cracks. A reminder of the long hours spent hunched over research papers and lab equipment. 58 was not old, but the years spent within the Foundation had taken their toll. The lines etched on my face were not merely a product of age, but a roadmap of the strange and unsettling encounters that had defined my career. The scar above my left eyebrow throbbed faintly, a memento from a particularly nasty encounter with a reality-bending entity I'd managed to neutralize with a combination of quick thinking and a strategically placed magnetic field. I made my way to the designated interview room, which was nondescript, almost disappointingly so. A simple table, 2 chairs, and a one-way mirror on the far wall for observation purposes. No flickering lights, no ominous shadows, just a well-lit space designed to minimize any potential distractions. I ran a hand over the smooth surface of the table, noting the subtle coolness of the metal beneath my fingertips. It was a specialized alloy, designed to withstand extreme temperatures and pressures, a precaution against the unpredictable nature of reality-bending entities. A small, almost unnoticeable camera was embedded in the ceiling, its lens focused on the center of the room where SCP-343 would be seated, and through which the observation team could monitor us, in real time or after the fact, if the recording equipment managed to function properly around the entity. A figure materialized in the chair opposite me, seemingly coalescing from the air itself. No dramatic flash of light, no puff of smoke, just a gradual emergence, as if the entity had always been there, simply waiting to be noticed. He was precisely as described in the files, an elderly man, his features a study in gentle curves and soft lines, his race impossible to determine. He wore simple, nondescript clothing that seemed to shift and change with the light. But it was his eyes that drew my attention, just as they had in the photographs. They were a deep, luminous blue, filled with an ancient wisdom that seemed to transcend time itself. They held a gentle, almost pitying amusement, as if he were observing a child playing with a complex toy it couldn't possibly understand. "Dr. Ashton," he said, his voice a soft, melodic baritone that resonated deep within my chest, "it is a pleasure to finally meet you. SCP-343. The pleasure is all mine. Please," he said with a gentle smile, "call me whatever you wish. I find these numerical designations rather impersonal. Don't you agree?" I hesitated for a moment, thrown off by his unexpected informality. "Very well," I said, choosing my words carefully. "What should I call you then?" "In the past," he said, his eyes twinkling, "some have called me God." The word hung in the air, heavy with implications. My carefully constructed facade of scientific detachment threatened to crumble. This was it, the moment of truth. Time to put my skepticism to the ultimate test. And do you believe that to be an accurate assessment? He chuckled, a warm, rich sound that filled the room. Belief, he said, is a powerful force, Dr. Ashton. It shapes reality in ways you are only beginning to understand. Perhaps it is enough to say that I am what your Foundation believes me to be. For now. And so it began. Our first conversation was a cautious dance, a verbal sparring match between a skeptic and an entity claiming omnipotence. I pressed him on the nature of reality, the origins of the universe, the existence of other dimensions. He answered my questions patiently, thoughtfully, often turning my queries back on me, forcing me to confront the limitations of my own understanding. He spoke of concepts that stretched the boundaries of theoretical physics, of dimensions beyond human comprehension, of the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. He did so with an eloquence, with an authority that was hard to dismiss. "You seem troubled, Dr. Ashton," he said, his eyes piercing. "Perhaps a cup of coffee will help. You look like you haven't had a decent cup in years." Before I could even formulate a response, a steaming mug materialized on the table in front of me, seemingly out of thin air. It was a specific, rather obscure brand of Colombian coffee, one that I had mentioned enjoying in my youth during a conversation with a colleague, a detail I was certain was not in the Foundation's database. And the mug. It was from a small cafe in my hometown, a place that had closed down decades ago. A place I hadn't thought about in years. "How?" I began, my voice trailing off. My mind raced, searching for a rational explanation. Advanced holographic technology, some form of telepathic suggestion. As I stared at the coffee, a tingling sensation began on my skin, a subtle vibration that seemed to spread from my fingertips to my arms. It was a strange, not unpleasant feeling. I flexed my fingers, trying to identify the source of the sensation, but it persisted. "Don't overthink it, Doctor," he said, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "Just enjoy the coffee. It's exactly as you remember it." He was right. The aroma, the taste, the warmth, it was perfect. It was more than just coffee. It was a memory, a tangible link to a past I thought I had forgotten. And in that moment, as I savored the familiar taste, a seed of doubt was planted in my mind. A doubt that would soon blossom into a full-blown crisis of faith, not in any god, but in the very foundations of my own understanding. The game, as they say, was afoot. The coffee incident, as I had mentally dubbed it, marked a turning point. It was a small anomaly, easily dismissed in isolation, but it chipped away at the bedrock of my skepticism. It was a crack in the foundation, a subtle hint that perhaps my understanding of reality was not as comprehensive as I believed. The tingling sensation, which had become a recurring phenomenon during my interactions with SCP-343, intensified whenever the entity performed these seemingly impossible feats. It was as if my body was reacting to the bending of reality, a subtle alarm bell ringing in the depths of my being. My life outside the interview room began to unravel. My pen, a sturdy Foundation-issue instrument, would occasionally levitate a few inches above my desk, jotting down my thoughts before I could even articulate them. At first, I dismissed it as a momentary lapse in my concentration, but the phenomenon persisted, the pen moving with increasing confidence, scribbling complex equations and diagrams that seemed to flow directly from my subconscious. These weren't random scribbles. They were detailed analyses of SCP-343's statements, explorations of theoretical physics that pushed the boundaries of my own understanding. The equations suggested a connection between consciousness and the fundamental forces of the universe, a concept that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Then came the incident with my research files. I had meticulously organized my notes on SCP-343, categorizing them by topic, date, and level of perceived threat, which, in the entity's case, was consistently assessed as minimal. One morning, I found my files rearranged, not just reordered, but reorganized into a complex, multidimensional structure. The documents seemed to be interconnected, linked by a web of cross-references and annotations that I hadn't created. It was as if the files had reorganized themselves, guided by an unseen intelligence. The diagrams were particularly unsettling, depicting abstract concepts that hovered on the edge of my comprehension. They were beautiful, in a strange, unsettling way. I felt like a student stumbling upon a textbook written in a language he hadn't yet learned. I began experiencing vivid, almost hallucinatory dreams. I would see swirling galaxies, hear the silent hum of distant stars, and feel the gentle pressure of SCP-343's presence, as if it were reaching out to me across the vast expanse of space and time. These weren't the nightmares of a troubled mind. They were glimpses into a different reality. The dreams always ended with me looking into a mirror and seeing a distorted face staring back, a face that was both mine and not. I attempted to document these events, to apply the same rigorous methodology that had served me so well in the past. But my equipment consistently malfunctioned in the presence of these anomalies. Audio recorders produced nothing but static, video cameras flickered and died, and digital files became corrupted, their data scrambled beyond recovery. My modified Geiger counter, however, registered brief, unexplainable spikes in radiation whenever these events occurred. It was as if the fabric of reality was fraying at the edges, emitting a burst of energy that only my specialized instrument could detect. There was a measurable, albeit unexplainable, effect. The culmination of these unsettling events came during my next interview with SCP-343. We were discussing the nature of the cosmos, a topic that had always fascinated me. I had presented my theories, grounded in the latest astrophysical research, outlining the known universe's vastness and complexity. He listened patiently, a gentle smile on its lips. Then, with a casual wave of his hand, he transformed the interview room. The walls dissolved, the ceiling disappeared, and I found myself standing in the middle of a star-filled void. It was a breathtakingly realistic recreation of the cosmos, a living, breathing planetarium that stretched to infinity. "You speak of the universe as if it were a static entity," he said, his voice echoing through the simulated cosmos. "A fixed construct governed by immutable laws. But what if those laws are merely suggestions? What if reality itself is more malleable than you believe?" He then proceeded to demonstrate, manipulating nebulae and galaxies with effortless gestures, like a conductor leading an orchestra of celestial bodies. He showed me the birth and death of stars, the collision of galaxies, the intricate interplay of dark matter and dark energy. It explained complex astrophysical principles not as abstract theories, but as tangible forces it could directly control. It was a lecture beyond anything I could have ever imagined, a glimpse into the inner workings of the universe that dwarfed even the most advanced scientific models. The mental pressure I had felt before intensified, pressing against my consciousness like a gentle, insistent tide. It was not painful, but it was profoundly disorienting. I felt my sense of self begin to fray, my identity dissolving into the vastness of the cosmos. I was no longer Charles Ashton, Foundation researcher. I was a tiny, insignificant speck of consciousness adrift in an infinite sea of stars. The experience was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. I was witnessing firsthand the power of a being that could create and destroy universes with a thought. It was a power that made a mockery of my carefully constructed scientific worldview. The tingling sensation on my skin reached a fever pitch, my entire body vibrating with an energy I couldn't explain. I felt a profound sense of cosmic insignificance, a realization that humanity's understanding of the universe was akin to an ant trying to understand the workings of a supercomputer. Then, as abruptly as it began, the demonstration ended. The walls of the interview room reappeared. I was left shaken, my mind reeling from the experience. My carefully constructed reality had been shattered, replaced by a universe far more complex and mysterious than I could have ever imagined. The next interview was even more disorienting. We were discussing the nature of time, a concept that had always fascinated me. I argued for its linearity, its unidirectional flow from past to present to future, citing the laws of thermodynamics and the concept of entropy. Time, he said, is not as rigid as you believe. It is more like a river with currents and eddies, loops and bends. The room shimmered, and I found myself reliving the past 5 minutes of our conversation. It was a perfect repetition, down to the exact intonation of our voices, the subtle creaking of my chair, the faint whirring of the ventilation system. I was trapped in a temporal loop, a localized distortion of time that only I seemed to perceive. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "A demonstration," he replied. "A small illustration of the malleability of time. I tried to communicate with the observation team through the one-way mirror, banging on the glass and shouting, but they remained oblivious, their faces impassive and their movements unchanged. I felt trapped in a separate reality, a pocket dimension where time had become unmoored. The mental pressure returned, accompanied by a sharp, localized pain behind my eyes, as if my brain struggled to process the paradoxical nature of the event. And then again, the momentary flash in the mirror on the wall, a face that was not mine, yet still staring back at me. The loop repeated multiple times before finally releasing me, leaving me disoriented and profoundly disturbed. I was no longer just an observer of the anomaly. I was becoming a part of it. The experience had been a brutal assault on my senses, a direct challenge to my understanding of the fundamental laws of the universe. Driven by a need to understand, I began to obsessively pore through the Foundation's archives, specifically the records pertaining to SCP-343's earliest interactions with the organization. The deeper I dug, the more uneasy I became. Reports, audio logs, and video files, many heavily redacted or partially destroyed, painted a disturbing picture. The early days of SCP-343's containment were marked by an almost religious fervor. Personnel addressed the entity with a reverence that bordered on worship, using terms like Lord and Creator. They asked for guidance, for wisdom, for miracles. One particular audio log made my blood run cold. It was a recording of an interview conducted by Dr. Huxley, my mentor, his voice younger, filled with a naive enthusiasm that was now absent. He was asking SCP-343 about the creation of the universe, his tone laced with awe and a hint of fear. The entity's response was calm, measured, almost paternalistic. It spoke of the universe as a grand experiment, a vast construction, a structure built from the fundamental elements of existence. It was during this exchange that a specific phrase caught my attention. Dr. Huxley, in a moment of uncharacteristic poeticism, had referred to the entity as the architect of eternity, the weaver of the grand design. The entity had responded with a soft chuckle saying, "Such grand titles, Doctor, but if it pleases you, you may call me Eon, for I am as old as time itself." The realization hit me. The Foundation, in its initial zeal to understand and perhaps control SCP-343, had inadvertently shaped its perceived identity. They had treated it like a god, and it had, in turn, adopted the persona. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy, a feedback loop of belief and reality. The entity, lacking a fixed identity, had become what they projected onto it. It was not inherently a god, but a being of immense power, so malleable that it became a mirror to their expectations. Further digging confirmed my suspicions. I found internal memos discussing the potential benefits of maintaining a stable and cooperative relationship with SCP-343 by reinforcing its adopted persona. There was even a classified project, codenamed the Shepherd Protocol, aimed at subtly guiding the entity's behavior through carefully chosen language and interactions. The project had been seemingly abandoned, but never officially terminated. Its digital ghost lingered in the system. My world had been turned upside down. The anomaly wasn't just Aeon, as I now thought of him. It was the Foundation itself. We were the architects of our own fear, the unwitting creators of the very God we sought to contain. I felt a growing sense of unease, a premonition that we were playing with forces we didn't understand, forces that could easily slip beyond our control. The question wasn't whether Aeon was dangerous, but whether we were, with our meddling and manipulations. Armed with this new understanding, I requested another interview. This time, I wouldn't be approaching him as a skeptic, seeking to debunk a deity. Instead, I would approach him as one might approach a mirror, hoping to glimpse not just a reflection, but a truth that lay hidden beneath the surface. The interview room felt different this time. The environment seemed to hum with a subtle energy, a tangible tension that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps it was just my heightened awareness, my senses attuned to the subtle shifts in reality that seemed to accompany Aeon's presence. He materialized in the chair opposite me, his form solidifying from the air as if he were a thought taking shape. His eyes, those ancient luminous pools of blue, met mine. There was a knowing glint in them, a hint of amusement, perhaps even a touch of sadness. "Dr. Ashton," he said, his voice a soft melody in the quiet room. "You seem different, troubled." "I've been doing some research," I replied, choosing my words carefully, "into your history with the Foundation." "Ah," he said, a subtle nod of his head. "The archives. A fascinating, if somewhat incomplete record of human endeavor." "They called you God," I said, the word feeling strange on my tongue, a concept I had long since dismissed as a relic of a bygone era. "They treated you like a deity." "And so for a time I became one," he replied, his voice devoid of any hint of arrogance or pride. It was a simple statement of fact. "Belief, Dr. Ashton, is a powerful force. It can shape reality, create worlds, even define gods. You didn't always see yourself that way?" He smiled, a gentle, almost melancholic expression. "I have been many things, seen through many eyes, worn many masks. Before your Foundation found me, I was adrift, a consciousness without form, a story without an author. Your colleagues, they gave me a narrative, a role to play, and I, in my loneliness, perhaps embraced it." This was it, the confirmation I had sought. He wasn't inherently a god, but a being of immense power, so malleable that he became a mirror to our expectations. "What are you, really?" The air in the room changed, the familiar tingling sensation spreading across my skin. The mental pressure I had come to associate with his demonstrations returned, but this time it felt different, less intrusive, more like a gentle caress. "What am I?" he repeated, his voice echoing as if from a great distance. "That, Dr. Ashton, is the question, isn't it? Perhaps in time, you will help me find the answer." He leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine. In their depths, I saw not the benevolent deity the Foundation had crafted, but something else, something older, something searching. I saw galaxies swirling, stars being born and dying, the endless expanse of the cosmos reflected in his gaze. And for a fleeting moment, I saw the multitude of faces from the mirror, the echoes of countless beings, all staring back at me through Aeon's eyes. "They think they're containing you," I said. "But what if you're containing them? What if this whole charade is just a way for you to observe us, to understand us?" A slow smile spread across Aeon's face. "Perhaps," he said, his voice a soft whisper that seemed to fill the entire room. "Or perhaps we are all just characters in a story, waiting to discover our roles." The interview ended shortly thereafter. The comfortable, predictable world I thought I knew had dissolved, replaced by a reality far more complex and mysterious. The Foundation, with its secrets and its manipulations, was not the solution, but part of the problem. And Aeon, the entity we had sought to control, might just be the key to understanding the true nature of the universe and our place within it. My unauthorized foray into the Foundation's archives did not go unnoticed. Within days, I was summoned to a meeting with Site Director Dalton and, to my surprise, Dr. Huxley. The director's office was a stark, functional space, a reflection of the man himself. Dalton was a man of medium height and a severe demeanor, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, each line a mark of the difficult decisions he had made. He exuded an air of weary authority, the burden of command heavy on his shoulders. Dr. Huxley, on the other hand, looked older than his years, his face marked by a deep-seated weariness that spoke volumes about the toll the Foundation had taken on him. His once sharp eyes were clouded with regret and resignation. He seemed a ghost of the mentor I once knew. "Dr. Ashton," Dalton began, "your recent activities have come to our attention. You accessed classified files, specifically those pertaining to SCP-343. Care to explain yourself?" I met his eyes directly. "I believe the Foundation's understanding of SCP-343 is fundamentally flawed," I stated. "We've manipulated it, shaped its perceived identity, and in doing so, we may have created a far greater danger than we realize." Dalton's expression remained unchanged, but Dr. Huxley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Explain," Dalton said, the single word, a command. I laid out my findings, detailing the early interactions, the Shepard Protocol, and my own conversations with Aeon. I spoke of the entity's malleable nature, its adoption of the God persona, and the potential consequences of our actions. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Dalton steepled his fingers, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the walls of his office. Dr. Huxley avoided my eyes, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Your concerns are noted, Dr. Ashton," Dalton finally said, his voice betraying nothing. "However, you fail to grasp the larger picture. SCP-343 is an entity of immense power. Our actions, while perhaps unorthodox, were necessary to maintain a stable and cooperative relationship. A controlled God is infinitely preferable to an unconstrained one. But is it truly controlled?" I countered. "Or are we simply playing a part in a larger game, one we don't even understand? We've created a narrative, and now we're trapped within it." "Speculation," Dalton dismissed, waving a hand. "We deal in facts, Dr. Ashton, not philosophical musings. The fact is, SCP-343 has been cooperative, contained, and has caused no harm. Our methods, however unconventional, have proven effective." It was Dr. Huxley who finally broke his silence, his voice a low, raspy murmur. "He's right, you know," he said, looking at me with pity and regret. "We built a cage of belief, and now we're trapped inside it with him. I tried to warn them years ago. I tried to stop it. But the lure of control, of order, it was too strong." Dalton turned to Huxley, his eyes narrowed. "That's enough, Doctor," he said sharply. "This discussion is over." He then turned back to me, his eyes cold and hard. "You have a choice, Dr. Ashton. You can join a specialized team dedicated to maintaining the Shepard Protocol. Your knowledge of SCP-343's true nature could be valuable. Alternatively, you can be reassigned. Your talents could be put to use elsewhere, far from Site-19. The choice was clear. Become complicit in the Foundation's deception or be silenced. My mind raced, weighing the options, the potential consequences. To join them would be to betray everything I believed in, to abandon the pursuit of truth for the sake of a fabricated order. But to refuse, that would mean losing everything, being exiled from the only life I had ever known. I thought of Aeon, of the vast, unknowable power it held, of the questions that still lingered in my mind. Could I truly walk away, leaving those questions unanswered? Could I abandon the search for understanding, even if it meant challenging the very foundations of the organization I had dedicated my life to? "I need time," I said finally. Time is a luxury we don't have, Dalton replied. I need your answer now. He deserves a moment, John, Dr. Huxley interjected, his voice surprisingly firm. Give him that, at least. Dalton considered this, his eyes shifting between me and Huxley. A hint of something, perhaps respect, crossed his face. Very well, he conceded. You have until the end of the day. Make your decision, Dr. Ashton, and choose wisely. I spent the remaining hours grappling with my dilemma while wandering the corridors of Site-19. I found myself drawn back to the observation room overlooking Aeon's containment chamber. The room was empty, the entity absent from its usual chair, but I could still feel its presence, a subtle energy that permeated the space. As the day drew to a close, I made my decision. I met with Aeon one last time. The entity materialized in the chair opposite me, its eyes filled with that same knowing glint. Have you made your choice, Dr. Ashton? He asked, his voice a gentle murmur. I have, I replied. I won't be joining your shepherds. A faint smile touched Aeon's lips. A wise decision, perhaps, or perhaps not. Time will tell. What will you do now? I asked. Do? He repeated, tilting his head slightly. Why, nothing, Dr. Ashton. I will continue to be what I am, what I have always been, a mirror. It is not my role to act, but to reflect. The choices, the actions, those belong to you, to all of you. But you could change things, I said, a hint of desperation in my voice. You could break free from this charade. And what then? He asked, his eyes searching mine. Would that truly solve anything? Or would it simply create a new set of problems, a new set of illusions? The universe, Dr. Ashton, is a complex structure built with layers of belief, perception, and choice. It is not my place to unravel it, but to observe its patterns. He then said something that stayed with me long after the interview was over. We will be watching, Dr. Ashton, with great interest. My reassignment was swift and efficient. I was transferred to a remote research outpost in the Arctic, a place where the only anomalies were the occasional polar bear and the biting cold. It was a far cry from the heart of the Foundation, from the mysteries of Site-19 and the mystery of Aeon. My access to the Foundation's network was restricted, my research limited to mundane, utterly pointless tasks. I was, for all intents and purposes, silenced, but not broken. I continued my research secretly in the quiet solitude of the Arctic, exploring the nature of reality, the power of belief, and the interconnectedness of all things. I corresponded with Dr. Huxley, cryptic, coded messages passed back and forth, a lifeline between two men trapped in a system they no longer fully trusted. He had chosen to stay, to try and mitigate the damage from within, a choice I respected but couldn't share. Years passed. The world outside the Foundation continued its march forward, oblivious to the hidden forces that shaped its destiny. I kept up with current events as best as I could. One day, a coded message arrived from Dr. Huxley. It was short, cryptic, but its meaning was clear. The mirror is cracking. I looked up at the night sky, at the vast expanse of stars stretching to infinity. The tingling sensation, which had become a constant companion, intensified. It was a feeling of anticipation, of change, of a future yet to be written. The story, it seemed, was far from over. The unwritten page remained, waiting for a new chapter to begin. And as I looked at the cosmos, I knew that my role, however small, was not yet finished. The universe, after all, had a funny way of drawing you back in, especially when you least expected it.